How to tell if a game is actually scary. You ever been like, oh, I feel like getting scared, or you want to skip the horror movie and jump straight into an experience so you find a horror game? We all have. But as many of us know, horror games can be a hit or miss. They're either scary as hell or whack as hell. Sometimes they're in between, but that never scratches the itch. We've all also tried reviews, but they either end up spoiling the game or just rating the gameplay as a whole. Well, let me tell you something. What if you can rate a game based on how scary it is? With little to no spoilers and little to no emphasis on gameplay. Well, we can. How? By using the 3 elements of fear: dread, terror, horror. You've heard of these before, but what do they actually mean? And how can we use these elements to rate a game's scariness? Now it's easier if I show you. Picture this, the life stages of a dragonfly. We got the egg, to the nymph, to the adult, and back to the egg. Now just replace it with these: dread, terror, and horror. Dread leads to terror, which leads to horror, and if done effectively, horror will birth dread, restarting the cycle. Now that you understand the cycle of fear, what do they actually mean? Let's go over it. Dread, the feeling of being apprehensive due to fear. Sort of like you hear creepy noises down a hallway and you don't know what to expect, and you get that tightness in your chest. In gaming, it's the atmosphere and that persistent feeling. Terror, when you make your way down that hallway to open the door only to be met by a chainsaw-wielding nut trying to kill you. In gaming, it's the intensity and that heart-pounding feeling, that in-the-moment type thing. Horror, you just escaped the killer and you're hiding and dealing with the shock. You try to compose yourself and escape, but you need to be careful. In gaming, it's the trade-off. You calm down, but how calm can you really get? Cool, now that the cycle and what it means makes sense. So now, the atmosphere, the intensity, and the trade-off. What goes into these things? I got you. The atmosphere. Lighting, music, set design, pretty dry cut and simple. The intensity, basically jump scares, chase/fights, creature designs, antagonist designs, whatever you want to call it. Everything that's kind of like in the moment type thing. And the trade-off, basically the shock after the fact and the moment of rest. I know it's kind of opposites here, but bear with me. It's basically like you just got done running and now you're hiding in a locker, right? Like an Outlast, for example. You're freaking out, but you're also calming down. And that quick little like instant when you start to go like, okay, now it's time to go out, but then you're scared again, that's the cycle restarting. Or like when you go to a save room in Resident Evil, something like that, if that makes sense. Alright, cool. Now we know the elements of fear, what they mean, and how they apply to gaming. Now, how do we rate its scariness? How can we tell how scary it is? With this. The fear gauge. What the hell is even that? Well, it's all the elements we just spoke about poured into one easy to understand rating on how scary something is in a percentage format. For example, this game is 75% scary, which means it's pretty scary. It leans more like the average-ish, above average-ish on how scary horror games are. Now, for those of y'all who've been with the channel for a minute, you know I try to do something like this with the horror factor, but I felt like it was missing something. And it felt a little too informative rather than its intended goal. Like, I will go over the deep details. Like, we're still gonna be doing that for this, but I focus too much on that and see it from a technical point of view rather than, well, I should say, instead of also incorporating the actual feeling that I got. Because something like, for example, let's say Doom, right? Y'all know it's an action horror game, right? It has horror elements. If I went into detail on like a technical level, technically, it's actually a pretty scary game, right? But for those of y'all who played it know it's like nowhere near scary, honestly. It just has horror elements in it. And it's like action, you blast things, you destroy things, it's fun as hell. So basically, that's what I feel like I was missing. Now, for those of y'all who are coming over from that one episode and like that stuff, don't worry. We're still gonna go over fun facts and details and tidbits and all that stuff of the horror games. Sometimes we'll go into the development, sometimes we won't, because I'm gonna try and aim for more games, like a more of like a bigger type thing, because instead of just AAA, I'm gonna try focusing on indie games as well, maybe just indie developers as a whole, but less spoilery and more spoiler free. That makes sense. Also, of course, I had to account for gameplay, just like as I mentioned before. I don't even know if I mentioned it or not, but we do need to account for gameplay, because at the end of the day, if you're playing a walking simulator and expecting that to be scary, sometimes for people like me, if y'all feel this way, I don't know how many of y'all feel this way, but some people find walking simulators scary as hell. But over time, you go like, all right, basically this just feels like a haunted house. Like I'm going to a haunted house event on Halloween. I'm just walking and I'm expecting a jump scare, expecting this, whatever. You know what I mean? That's kind of like why I sit on that stuff. I'm gonna put a little disclaimer because this rating thing is based on an emotion, a strong emotion such as fear, which tends to be more subjective, and everyone has different types of phobias. You know what I mean? Like I might find something scary like mannequins, for example, right? And then y'all go like, mannequins ain't scary. I know my wife don't think mannequins scary. I think they're freaky. So keep that in mind. But we're gonna be taking a mixed approach. We're gonna be doing a subjective and objective, kind of like a little asymmetrical, a little bit more on the objective side, but we're gonna take a lot of input from the subjective side, because at the end of the day, a game could be technically scary but not scare you as much. You know what I mean? Kind of like how I explained with those walking simulator things. Anyway, that's the new project I'm working on for y'all, for the channel. This is why I've been gone for a minute. So stay tuned, because the first fear gauge episode is going to be on Dead Space, where we'll dive deep into the crazy cosmic horror that was inspired by Resident Evil 4. Y'all didn't know that? It was a fun fact. Dude played Resident Evil 4, was like, yo, how come you can't move? You could just stay still like a brick, like a stone. So he wanted to make it more immersive, which was a fire-ass game. It scared the hell out of me as a kid. Anyway, that's it. I love y'all. Peace.